There's a few seats up front here. Welcome back for the second panel. This panel is taking a closer look at how employment challenges transpire on the ground. Before I introduce this set of panelists, just want to remind you all to submit your questions. If you're in the audience here in person, you've been sending us a lot of great questions. I can't answer them all, so please forgive me. I often don't answer them when I think we've already covered that topic and this is all happening in real time. But those of you who are joining us through our live webcast, you can submit your questions as well to, I'll tell you, events@urban.org. And for those of you who like to tweet, we'd also encourage you to do so and use the hashtag #live@urban, which is right up there on the screen. Okay, so we're going to launch into another discussion. I expect we'll touch on some of the same topics, but also potentially some new ones. And this panel consists of 4 distinguished guests. To my immediate left is Will Avila. He is the CEO of Changing Perceptions. It's an organization that helps returning citizens start and run their own businesses. We also have Cynthia Roseberry. She's the brand new executive director of the Council for Court Excellence, which is dedicated to improving justice in the DC community, has done a lot of research on this topic. And then we have Malcolm Glenn, who is Strategic Partnerships Manager for Uber Technologies, Inc., that has been on record for hiring and supporting the employment of people who have criminal records and have served time. And last but not least, we have Sakinia Hammond, who is on this panel as a returning citizen and also an Aspire program graduate. You heard about the Aspire program in our earlier panel. Like the previous panel, we're just trying to get a dialogue started, but we have to start somewhere. And I'd like to start with Sakinia for a couple of reasons. One is I think it's really brave to identify on a panel like this as a returning citizen. It's not easy, and I admire you for it. And we really want to honor lived experiences. And one of the questions I got from the audience is, we want to hear more from people with lived experiences. We actually have 2 such people on this panel. So I want to honor your experiences. And I also want to just say, perhaps it's obvious for people in this room, but that we know that you're more than that. You shouldn't, just because you're representing that perspective and experience doesn't mean that that's who you are. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to hear from you first to honor that experience. If you can share a little bit, you served 16 years behind bars and faced a lot of challenges, ended up graduating from the Aspire program, which is such an accomplishment. Can you share a little bit about some of the challenges you faced?
Yes. As you all know, I'm Sakinia Hammond, 35 years old. I got incarcerated when I was 18. I served 16 years on that 35-year life sentence. Coming home wasn't easy. As some of the panelists before us, they said that they, will reach out to the women that's incarcerated before they come out. Well, it's not them that's not making the job happen. It's inside of the institution that's hindering us from getting that information. Because I didn't get, we was gonna help you, or it's a program you can do as soon as you come out, or we're gonna support you. We didn't get that message. And it's not them, again, trying to give it to us. It's the inside of the institution lacking to do their job as passing that information on. So I came out to nothing. I went to Fairview. I had little support there. I was trying to do events, trying to get my story out there, trying to give back, trying to just get ahead and do something different from what I learned all my life. And I never had the support. So I had to reach out to other people who was in my situation, people who was trying to do what I was doing but already doing it. So they gave me a hand. I started the entrepreneur program successfully. I completed it. It wasn't easy, but as one of the panelists before said, we were thirsty. That stipend was money to us. That meant a lot to somebody coming home with nothing. You making $9 an hour, but at the end of the day, it was more than what we had. So yeah, we kept coming back. We went constantly. We went through the struggle of how we're gonna get there. Hey, can I get a ride? You know, all of that. That was my issue. That was my story. But I continued to go because I knew from that path I was gonna go through great things. So I obtained my business license as traveling beautician in a mobile beauty salon. Again, it's not easy just to live off a stipend, so it was hard trying to find a job because I didn't have a license and I have a big 16-year-old gap in my experiences of working. So I use transferable skills, something that I learned at Project Empowerment. I took the classes and the programs that I did in prison, and I put those on my resume and my experience on my resume, and they bought it. And it's all about what you're selling. Because if you sell a good brand, they're gonna buy it. And so I sold it. I told them I know how to do this and that, and I really kind of didn't, but I was willing to learn. I mean, it's real. You have to sell your story the best way you want them to read it. And so that's what I did. I had no experience. I have never had a job. I've never had nothing but a criminal record. So I was afforded an opportunity to work at Home Depot. In 4 months, I was promoted to pro desk, which means now I do ordering online for contractors. So that's 4 month span. So I was leading and heading to great things. And I say that to say that, yeah, it wasn't easy, but you got to sell your story. You got to sell your brand. You have to give them that 3-minute pitch. You have to tell them everything that you think you know how to do. You have to tell them as if you already done it. And so coming out, I was invited to do guest speaking for returning citizens. We do care about our returning citizens. I'm one, and we reach out to each other. I'm in a program called The Wire. And what we're trying to do is get together hygiene boxes for those ladies that are incarcerated, get together smart trip cards, give them their first outfit, whatever it is that they may stand in need of. We're trying to meet them where they are. So these are returning citizens, nonprofit. This is what we're doing, going in our pocket to put together these hygiene. So if we can do it, I know the people who have them dollars, you all can support us and help us make that happen. It's been phenomenal to be able to reach out to people and give them my story. I don't know how much of it affects them. I don't know if it ever affects them, but it gives me a relief. It helps me relieve, and it helps me to go forth because I'm being heard. My voice for a long time wasn't heard because I was incarcerated. And how many of us hear people that's incarcerated? You may respond, but you don't always react. And so I'm here for those who responded. I'm able to see them face to face, and for those who reacted. So.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story.
No problem.
So you represent what we heard in the other panel as well,
Yeah.
which is that there is a real thirst, there is a real desire to work and to succeed in the workplace. And we have 3 people here who have experience employing people with criminal records or who have served time. And I'm interested in hearing from all of you what your experiences have been. We've already recognized in the earlier panel that we're lacking good data on how exceptional employees people with records can be. But there's certainly personal experiences. And I'm wondering if any of you can share those, both the experiences and the ways that can be supportive of people who are possibly getting their very first job after serving time.
Sure,
So, go ahead.
thank you. Well, Sakina, I just want to say we do hear you, and we appreciate you telling your story. And certainly for someone like me who works in this every day, but it doesn't have a lived experience, it means a lot. So thank you for doing that. You know, we stumbled into this work. We did not start Uber to do criminal justice work. We did not intend to do this. You know, I think Uber, in large part, our playbook in the early days was to get into cities, build that demand, and then sort of ask questions later. And I think we realized over time that we have not just an opportunity, but a responsibility to be good stewards in those cities where we work. So a couple of years ago, we started having conversations with organizations, and they made clear to us, hey, listen, we looked at your driver screening criteria. You're disqualifying folks for things that have nothing to do with how well someone's going to drive someone from point A to point B. And so, you know, we thought about it, and we realized, yeah, we can actually change this. And we're headquartered in California, so we thought let's start there and see what happens. And so essentially what we did is we aligned our driver screening process around something called Proposition 47, which was a statewide ballot measure which essentially reclassified a number of low-level nonviolent felonies as misdemeanors. We then aligned our process around Prop 47, and we stopped disqualifying people from driving with Uber for things like petty theft, check fraud, resisting and evading arrest. These things obviously don't really have any material impact on how well you're going to do as a driver. And so we, as a result of that work, were able to be one of the inaugural signers of the White House's Fair Chance Business Pledge. And through that process, we realized that there are a whole bunch of other businesses that, to Nancy's point, were really looking for data as to why giving opportunities to returning citizens, people with records, was the right thing to do. So we looked at our data. We actually looked at it again last month. So we started this a year and a half ago, and we just looked at the California data to start. And there are 6,900 people who have signed up to drive with Uber as a result of the new criteria who couldn't drive under the old criteria. There are about 3,000 of those people who are actually taking rides. And here's the important thing. Their average rating is a 4.8. The average rating across the state of California is a 4.8. So we have data that shows this is not just the right thing to do, but it's actually going to be good for your business. We have good drivers on the road, giving people rides, making money. And the other thing I think is important to remember about Uber is we're one of the few entities that is okay if you decide to do something else that you find is better than us. So Uber is oftentimes a bridge once you get out, a bridge to the next thing, a bridge to the employment opportunity that you're really ultimately looking for. And so my remit in the last year and a half has really been to go out there and tell our story of how the data is actually proving that this is the right thing to do, ideally to other large businesses, because there are fewer large businesses involved in this than there are smaller businesses. Ideally getting other people on board. Home Depot has been one of the foremost large businesses in this space, and we're hopeful that by telling stories, by showing data, we can get other businesses on board as well.
Thanks for that.
I was going to talk about a personal experience I had with hiring someone, and it really comes out of our report that we did at CCE called Beyond Second Chances. And I hold this up because we have Sakinia's picture here on the cover, so I hope you'll go to our website and pull that down. But one of the recommendations is to ensure that you have a holistic approach to people who are coming home and wanting jobs. And how that looked for me in real life was when I hired someone who was returning, to understand that, for example, a ride in a subway during rush hour could be stress-inducing. And so to change hours to accommodate something as stress-inducing as that, being crowded into a small car with a number of people. Or, there were many other smaller issues like that that, we don't think about on the broader scale, but if we think about caring for, sorry, I told you I was going to do that, caring for a human being, then we can think about how we can extend courtesies like that to our brothers and sisters for ways that they've lived in spaces that we don't really understand or haven't, walked through. So to be accommodating of that, the CCE pledge begins that process because it says you're going to support people who are returning. And so just to hear what folks are saying that are the issues that they're experiencing, and being willing to accommodate those in your employment of them is very important.
That's right. And those are reasonable accommodations that I think most employers could make, and it also builds on Malcolm's point about that flexibility that's often needed, especially when that job might not be the main job. Maybe it is the side hustle while you're trying to build your own business. So Will, I'd love to hear from you as well. You have a lot of experience working with people who are trying to build their own businesses. Can you share a little bit?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the Urban Institute and thank you all for being here, because you do continue to change my perception on how I view, the public and the community, because if it wasn't for a lot of you all support, I would have gave up, to tell you the truth. A lot of people asked me, what kept you going, and all I said was somebody gave me a chance. Somebody gave me that opportunity. When I started Clean Decisions was to focus on that mission to hire only returning citizens, and that's what I've devoted myself to, and in Clean Decisions, as being the CEO and owner of that, you know, I work with a lot of returning citizens, and when I see them come and ask me for a job, it just all comes back to my personal experiences and how I used to, you know, at one point I applied for 22 jobs and got rejected from 22 jobs. How I used to walk from upper Northwest all the way downtown to, you know, look for a job in the restaurant field, and, you know, just get the scratch of the head and say, you know what, yeah, we'll think about it. And, you know, I had to use the tools that was there given to me, but a lot of those opportunities were never given to me because of a criminal background, and you know, that was real discouraging. And when I see the guys that I work with today and the way they show up and the way they are encouraged to succeed because of something, you know, not only I did, but, you know, plenty more have done, is to create opportunities for them, is real encouraging for me to continue on. And from that, getting that tap on the shoulder and say, you know, how can I be like you? I say, oh, you know, you don't want to be like me, you know, but you know, but it's like, how can I start a business? How can I move forward, and how can I, you know, be that positive change in my community and my family? And I think through that, change of perception was created, because change of perception encourages to have ownership of professional business and be an entrepreneur. But not only that, but have an ownership mentality, and having that ownership mentality means that you go back home, because you only sometimes work 8 hours out of the day, but there's 24 hours. What do you do the rest of those hours? You go back home, and the people in your community, the family, the brother and the sister, the little brother, the little nephew, the little niece, will see you coming home from work, will see you coming home sometimes sweaty, hard, you're dirty, and they see that, and they say, you know what, he's doing it. You know, maybe sometimes they say, let me keep going to school, let me get a high school diploma, let me get a college degree, so I won't have to do that rough path. But, you know, that's what we try to encourage. And I think from changing perceptions, that community impact is such a great impact, because at the end of the day, it is the community that sees you. And if you go back to that negative community, you will most likely fail.
And I imagine it's kind of something that builds on itself, right? So you get a job, you feel a sense of independence and self-worth, you bring it back to your community sees that, you feel built up by it, and it encourages you to keep going, and also encourages others to follow suit. That's a beautiful circle right there.
Yeah. We try to change the perception on how life is viewed from a returning citizen, but not also a returning citizen, but by the community. You know what I mean? How can you see somebody on the metro and say, you know, how can I help you? You know, seeing them struggling, because you've probably seen it, people asking for money to get on the metro. You don't know if they're trying to get to a job or not. So.
Or trying to figure out how to use the metro system, right? Sakina, you probably had an experience with that when you got out after serving time, right?
Yeah, I got lost. I ran out of tokens. I had it to a point where I would just sit there and cry, because I'm late either for an appointment or I'm late going back to the halfway house, and that's trauma in itself. Because the two of the things that's important is don't be late, and then you don't want to not show up for an appointment, because then that means you're irresponsible and you're not serious. So yeah, I've been on the phone crying, listen, I want the job, but I can't, you know, all of that. And it goes back to something that you all said earlier. Where's the trauma support? Where's the mental health support? Where's the grief of substance and drug abuse? And one of the things you had asked one of the panelists earlier, what do you do when they get that stipend and then they want to go back and use because they got some money now to afford that habit? Well, part of Project Empowerment's, one of their rules are you get screen tests. You go and get a drug test before you start the program, and you get one before you graduate. And that indicates whether or not you were serious about the program. If you have a dirty, then you don't get to graduate. They'll do it the day of graduation, and you won't graduate, and you won't progress, and then they'll have you back on the waiting list to start all over again. So those who are serious is gonna pass that drug test. Those who are serious is gonna finish at the finish line. And those who aren't, everything weeds itself out. But they can't take time for every single individual, but those who serious, they'll pave the way for themselves.
Right. What happens to those who don't make it, who have dirty urines? Is there some referral to?
Yeah, referral to do it all over again.
But
Start
not a
your
referral
process
to
over.
address their underlying.
Yeah, they do that too.
around
They
use.
have a coach, a life coach, a job coach. They have all of those people set up for you. It's up to the individual.
I see.
And so if you take advantage of it, they're going to help you step by step. I didn't even know how to do a resume. I didn't know what to wear. They took me to Dress for Success, picked out outfits for us, showed us what we should wear. Don't wear loud makeup, don't wear this and that. They taught us a lot of things there at the program, but it's, again, up to the individual to take advantage.
It also strikes me too that when you have, that sort of a gap in employment or skills development, during a time when technology just moves ahead by leaps and bounds, that we have people at a distinct disadvantage. And I don't know if you were there, Nancy, when we went through the tour of the prison. We saw a Selectric typewriter. Many of you don't even know what that is.
The IBM Selectric.
The IBM
yes.
Selectric,
Remember
right?
it well.
And we talked to returning citizens who said, somebody said they were going to call me on a BlackBerry, and all I thought about was this little piece of
Fruit.
right? And
Yeah.
we say, well, just go to McDonald's and get a job. Well, you use an iPad to apply for a job at McDonald's. So there's a big skills gap. And
Right, and what we know about incarceration is, now I understand that they're trying to keep places secure, right? But to the extent that there's not a willingness to look at secure kind of internet options where you can have contact with the outside without risking security. These models exist, but the culture of prison is such that they're usually not open to delivering those types of services and technology.
And that compounds the problems for DC folks, because we know that they're incarcerated in prisons throughout the nation. So if there's no internet or wireless access to local job opportunities, then it's an even more isolating experience, as someone said.
I mean, this is certainly a problem for us. We're a company that, for many returning citizens, didn't even exist when they went in.
Right.
We're only 7 years old. Obviously, to drive with Uber, you need a card, you need a driver's license, but you also need a smartphone. And so being able to sort of deftly manage that smartphone when you're picking up passengers and following GPS, these are things that a lot of folks just are not familiar with. So we do try to provide help for those folks. We have things called green light hubs, where you can go if you have questions or you need help as a driver. We try to walk people through that process, but it is difficult. And to your point, Nancy, if there was more exposure to the things on the outside while people were incarcerated, I think they'd come out with a lot more of an ability to adjust to the times.
At least things wouldn't be so completely foreign, right?
Yeah.
I have some questions from the audience. This is an interesting one. Have any of your organizations reached out to law enforcement to try to gain their support to spread information about project empowerment and changing perceptions? This is an interesting question because we know that law enforcement is at the front end of the system. They're often the reason that people end up with criminal records. So interested to hear whether you all have any thoughts on that.
It's interesting that you ask. I'm a criminal defense lawyer down to my bones. And I recently had the opportunity to meet with Chief Newsom, our police chief here. And so I went in ready not to like him, and because I'm a defense lawyer to my bones, but I found him to be very interested in diverting people from the system. I found him to be very holistic in his approach. A couple of things that he said when we were talking about whether Emily Tatro was there as well. We were talking about whether what he was looking for in new police officers, and he said he wanted people who could make good decisions and who had some empathy. So that was very encouraging to hear from a police chief. So.
Any other thoughts on that question? Not going there, huh?
I would say,
Got nothing to say.
I don't blame you.
the only thing I'd say is, we've had a couple of conversations with organizations that do include law enforcement. And the thing that we just always remind them is that, hey, listen, 60% of our drivers are people of color. That means they're behind the wheel. That means they're more likely to engage with law enforcement in some way, perhaps get pulled over. And as we've seen, not just over the last couple of years, but over our lifetime, that could be fatal for particularly people of color. And so we just tell law enforcement, be thoughtful, that there are probably going to be more drivers on the road that are people of color, and be thoughtful and be smart and be empathetic if you encounter them during your jobs.
Well, I haven't had any conversations with law enforcement, but I would be ecstatic to have and to hear their point of view on,
Yeah.
on some things and how they can help the community, you know, at a starting from a young age to at an older age, and how they can be a positive influence. Because they are fathers, they are mothers, they are brothers, they are sisters too. So.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I should say also we did a study on perceptions of public safety in the DC community, and we'll hear a little bit more about that. But one of the things that came out of it was, I think you're going to see more efforts to be in the community. Not that I'm promoting the police, what am I saying here? But there are going to be more efforts to be community centric, and I think that's important.
Thank you for that. We have a question from the prior panel, and I didn't have time to ask it. And it's particularly a question that is posed to people who have experienced incarceration and others. It says, I'd like to hear from the formerly incarcerated first and then non-formerly incarcerated. Research has indicated that ban the box has unintended consequences. So that whereby the banning the box leads employers, this is theoretical, although there's some recent research that suggests there might be some validity there, that because employers don't have a ready mechanism to know when people have records, they use other unofficial measures such as the color of one's skin or their attire to presume that they have a criminal record, right? So this question is to find out, like, what you all, do you have any firsthand experiences around or perceptions or reflections around ban the box and these perceived unintended consequences?
Well, I'll speak on it a little. The ban the box really kind of like didn't affect me, but it didn't hurt me either.
Okay.
I had applied for a job. She didn't ask me, she just asked, tell me about yourself. Do you have a criminal history? And so I looked at her and I was like, yeah. She was like, oh, okay, give me a minute. She never finished my interview. She walked away. She actually acted as if she was so concerned, but we didn't even get into who I really was.
Right.
And though my charge is old, you can go now and it won't show up. I have a police clearance. So it's not like my record is exposed and you have no choice but to pay attention. She didn't even finish my interview. But ban the box wasn't, I think it was already present, but it couldn't affect her position because she had a private owned daycare and to their discretion as if you can work there or not. So then she threw, oh, but you know what? I'm going to get you another job. Don't worry. So now I'm looking at her like, I don't even want to work for you, you know, because of the perception that she have given me from prior. And then she give me a job, give me a date, then I go and I never start. So to me, it's like people want to give you an opportunity, but what was more phenomenal is she's a returning citizen. And so that kind of made me feel a certain way because you're my people.
Yep.
And we relate the same way, and you're no different from me, and I'm no different from you. So for you to do that, it didn't do nothing but motivate me. I got another job. And I got another job after that. And so it didn't stop me, but it can't hinder a person who's suffered from trauma, a person who's already been rejected from society. It can hinder a person from progressing. But ban the box, you know, I mean, it's great. I wish we get it on housing because housing is now starting to neglect the fact that we still need housing even though we returning citizens. And so once we get that on housing, we'll be good.
Okay. Well, any thoughts on ban the box?
Well, ban the box for me, it affected a lot. I mean, sometimes I would just try to use whatever measures I had, you know, to basically try to get a job. So if it meant by me saying yo hablo español, you know, so I can become that Spanish person that people want to put as a dishwasher, but it's all good with me. So ban the box for me really,
It
a
wasn't
lot of
relevant.
people, peers around me, got that sense of false hope because of Ban the Box, because the next step after the interview, you get that, I'm gonna still check you out and see what you're about. So you still won't get the job. And to me, that's how, at points, I viewed it. But the perception and the way it's changed now is basically how people, how these employers are giving you that opportunity to speak up and to show, first off, what you're about and what you want to do for the employment industry you want to work for.
Mm-hmm. Cynthia, Malcolm, and we know it's a well-intended policy, to be sure, and then the district is as far-reaching as I think anywhere in the country. But it's not perfect, and so I'm wondering what your thoughts and experiences are.
So today, Councilman Robert White is introducing the Criminal History Accuracy Assurance Act of 2017, and this act is aimed at third-party providers of information, holding them to the task of ensuring that the information is accurate. So even after we get, past Ban the Box, we know that the information in criminal history reports is inaccurate. It doesn't create a cause of action, but it does allow for a complaint for compliance and a fine that can be split between the general fund and the applicant. So that is one good step in that direction if it's passed.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and that is a great first step. Banning the box is important, but it still ultimately comes down to, as Will said, the background check. And, for example, as Marina said on the last panel, the FBI's database has, in DC, more than half of the records not including dispositions. Well, that means if you were arrested and not convicted, it doesn't show up. What kind of people are more likely to be arrested and not convicted? Black and brown folks. So the notion that Ban the Box is the entirety of the solution, I don't think it is, especially when you still have discriminatory practices in the background check policy. I think we really have to be thoughtful about the background checks we're using and making sure that they're accurate. And that, coupled with Ban the Box, I think is a great way to really give people the opportunity that they need.
There's something about this conversation and the one before it that troubles me a little bit, and that is that we talk about the inaccuracies of criminal background checks that might include people who weren't convicted, or we talk about employing people who maybe their criminal histories aren't relevant to the job because they're misdemeanors or they didn't hurt anybody. But there's a lot of people who serve time for violent offenses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's easily the biggest challenge of all, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a question about what happens for people whose conviction record is for a violent offense. Well, what do they experience, which clearly has to be the most difficult? And how do we get beyond that scarlet letter, which is huge in the context of looking at mass incarceration, where if there's going to be any dent in incarceration now, you have to look at folks who have been convicted of violent offenses.
I'm convicted of a violent offense, first-degree murder, but that doesn't stop. I did a background check for Home Depot. They did a fingerprint and they did a oral test. Came back, I got the job. It doesn't mean every job is going to do that or every job is going to give you an opportunity, but it means try.
Mm-hmm.
Keep trying.
Mm-hmm.
So what if they say no? Knock on another door. You have to keep going because you are a felon. Nothing is going to be given to you. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to trust you as they probably would if you wasn't a felon. Nobody's going to welcome you with open arms as they would to someone who doesn't have a criminal record. Mm-hmm. No one is going to give you anything. You have to go hard and take it. Mm-hmm. Or keep going until you find that job that'll say, you know what, I'm going to give you this one chance. You blow it, that's on you. Mm-hmm. I mean, it hurts, but it's also a motivation inside of that hurt.
Thank you for that.
So my experience in practicing federal criminal defense is that all of us are capable of doing all of the things that all of us do. And it's time to stop having us and them.
Yeah, the othering.
Those criminal types or those folks, and we are all brothers and sisters. And people used to say to me, oh, you're a criminal defense lawyer, I won't need you. And I said, the next time you go to dinner and have too much wine and drive home,
Mm-hmm.
you might need me.
Hmm.
So I think about Brian Stevenson when he says, we have to get proximate to the problem and change the narrative. And I think the beginning of that is understanding that people are capable of change You know, in the Clemency Project, we saw people who had been incarcerated for years, who had changed, who had gone in as children, who had changed. Think about how much we change, right? Not inside a prison. So, you know, it might sound simple but it's about love. You know, my Twitter handle is Justice is Love, because it's about loving our brothers and sisters.
I think there's a really important question too around when did it happen? And so for us, for example, in a lot of places, including DC, we're actually regulated by some local or state entity. And so there's a background check process written into law by which we have to abide. And so one of the things that we oftentimes say is, okay, fine, if you're going to disqualify for X, Y, and Z, even if we don't agree with it, make sure you're not looking back indefinitely. So maybe the right number is 5 years, 7 years, whatever the number is. Make sure it's not an indefinite look back period, because sometimes someone may have made a mistake, maybe a violent mistake, earlier in their life, but 16 years later, are you still going to hold that over their head? I don't think it makes sense. And so as we have a more evolved conversation around violent crimes, nonviolent crimes, I think we should be really thoughtful about how far back we're looking in a person's history, because it doesn't make sense to disqualify someone for something they did many, many years ago.
And the research bears that out. The age crime curve, those of you who are criminologists or you know, steeped in this topic know it well, where, you know, people age out of crime midway in their lives, if not earlier. And given the very, very long sentences that people serve, it stands to reason that most people exiting incarceration are not inclined to engage in any further criminal activity. I can't resist but pause and give a brief announcement, or advertisement, I should say. On Thursday, the Urban Institute is releasing a really exciting feature. It's called A Matter of Time, and it's all about people who have served extremely long sentences. We take a deep dive in the data in most of the states, not all of them in the union, looking at all the people who are serving very, very long sentences, and that volume of people has increased over time. It's interactive, you can look at the data, but there's also personal stories that we highlight of people who have experienced long sentences and the challenges that they face upon release. So stay tuned Thursday for A Matter of Time. Now I'd like to turn back to Malcolm, because you referenced this. And this is a question specifically for you. You referenced that you know, there's certain laws that you have to comply with in the district. But what do you, or what is Uber currently doing to address the number of men and women that have been removed from your company because of the criminal records checks in DC?
Yeah, so this is something we do with a lot of places, DC included. Oftentimes, the legislation that's written into law is overly restrictive, and it means people are getting disqualified who, in our minds, if it were up to us, if we were the adjudicators, would not get disqualified. And so we're constantly having conversations with local politicians, the mayor's office, or working with organizations in a place that can have conversations with local government to let them know this doesn't make sense. Oftentimes we're able to get those changed. We have a lot of partnerships in places around the country where organizations will push back. They will share stories of success that show that these laws are overly restrictive. It's difficult though, because it ultimately does require a legislative fix, but we're committed to continuing to have those conversations. We're committed to working with advocates who can tell the stories of why this doesn't make sense, and ideally we can get some of these laws changed. But it's a process, but one that we're committed to staying engaged in.
Are there other big companies who are similarly minded to you that you could kind of band together? We mentioned Home Depot. It seems like there could be a lot of power in numbers.
It's a really great question. So Home Depot is an organization that's done a lot of great work around this stuff. CVS is another organization that's taken some great steps to give work opportunities to returning citizens. Here's the interesting thing though, is we are regulated very differently than the Home Depots and the CVSs of the world. In a lot of places we're regulated very similar to how taxis are regulated. And so those regulations tend to be, for whatever reason, it's certainly a little bit more of an intimate experience when you're in the car with someone as opposed to, going to a store to buy something. But for whatever reason, we're regulated oftentimes a lot more strictly than a lot of other companies are. And so, we do partner with other organizations that have to comply with those same regulations, the Lyfts of the world. But beyond that, we usually have a slightly different regulatory framework, a more difficult one,
Right.
than a lot of other companies do.
I see. Cynthia, I want to shift focus a little bit and give you an opportunity to share some of the things you learned when you served on the Charles Colson Task Force on Corrections Reform, because that task force focused specifically on looking at people who were housed in the Bureau of Prisons, the Federal Bureau of Prisons. What did you learn and observe about employment readiness in that context, and where are the opportunities?
Well, you mentioned earlier that some of the records didn't follow. And of course, I mentioned earlier that the uniqueness of DC is that folks aren't housed near where they are. I actually had the opportunity to do some mock interviews with some folks who were about to come out. And that was an interesting experience because I encountered people who had to be very self-assured in that confinement space. But in that interview space with me, you could tell there was some self-esteem issues. And so I learned from that this trauma that we talk about, we think about it largely in big terms, maybe childhood abuse or even physical abuse in prison, but the idea of putting human beings in cages, right? And not attending to mental health, physical, and even sort of the emotional needs that we all have, and then expecting them to come out and be strong is daunting. And we found that the Bureau of Prisons just wasn't a place that, I'm not sure to say that they didn't care, because we met some really caring professionals, but weren't funded properly enough. I think the head of the Bureau of Prisons told us at the time that, we don't ask for people, they just keep sending them to us, and we can't turn them away. And so they were doing more with little, but the basic human needs that people have to feel self-esteem, to look people in the eye, to feel worthy of a job, that kind of help was not there.
You're reminding me of some research we did several years ago where we interviewed people behind bars and then upon release in the community. And one of the findings we had, which was really made a big splash at the time, which is kind of surprising when I tell you what it is, but it hadn't been well documented in the field, is the importance of family and family support. You referenced those emotional needs. And we found that most everyone behind bars had someone they considered a family member that was supportive to them. And they were very much looking forward to the returning to the community and their family, and expected support from those family members. And that support was not only met, but it was exceeded. That the family was there for them. But when you have people in the district who, they're called DC code felons, that's the formal title, forgive me, who are housed all over the country, how do you maintain that family support? It's very challenging. And then you're missing that opportunity to support successful reintegration.
It is. I had a family member return to my home to me when I was living in Atlanta, who was a DC code violator, who didn't want to come back to DC in the same environment. So we had an opportunity to talk about those difficulties. And, but for the family support that we were able to give, it would have been very difficult for him.
Okay. Let's see, I'm working my way through. Okay, here's a question that's probably best answered by Will or Sakinia. What does it mean to juggle not just one job, but many, right? We talked a little bit about the side hustle, the building your own business. What are those challenges, and how can the existing programs support those heavy schedules and those demands?
juggling multiple jobs at one time is quite frankly very very hard. I can remember the first couple of days when I first started cleaning decisions, and I had to work a salary paid job for like 50 hours a week on top of working full time. So I would clean the kitchen till 3:30, 4 in the morning, and I would jump to the next job at 5:36, so I can make sure I gave them enough hours to be able to pay for my bills and pay for all the stuff that I needed to pay for. And knowing that, and then seeing the guys that come through the program, the women that come through the program, inspires me to just, keep pushing and showing. And I just want people to know that a lot of times, the only thing that's given to you, that was given to me, basically, the way I see it, was the break of dawn to keep going. To see the light come through the window and say, you know what, I'm gonna do this again. And I'm not gonna give up. I'm not gonna say I failed, even though I know I'm gonna hit some barriers. I know I'm gonna hit some walls. I know some doors are gonna close. I know some family members are gonna consider me a lost cause, and society considers me a lost cause. But I'm gonna keep pushing, and I'm gonna clock in, and I'm gonna see what I can do, and I'm gonna take that, my inner strength, and consider that, and make it, worthwhile. And I think you receive blessings for that, and I thank God for that.
I was working 2 jobs, and one job was just helping me pay for transportation to get to the other one, because that's how much I was making, really nothing. And so I figured, I gotta do some more applications. This is not gonna get it, and it's very quick to think about the other side of the law. But it's not as easy when you have done so much time to go back to the other side. So I was like, I'm just going to get a better job. I quit the one job and got a better job and promotion, and everything else follows. But it is hard. You're trying to make sure you got money on your Fed card. You got to eat. You got to get to this place. You got to go see your probation. They don't give you tokens to come see them. They want you to come see them, and you better be there. But what if you have no money? It's not an option. So you just have to prioritize what's important and make sure you keep them smart trips loaded. That's all I can say.
Can I just say one more thing? Is sometimes people forget that it's not just about getting the job. It's about moving up and being able to pay for the lifestyle. I'm not talking about buying fancy shoes and fancy clothes. I'm talking about buying diapers. Being able to pay the rent, being able to pay the utility bills. I think sometimes the employer forgets that $12.50 or $12 an hour or $11 an hour just doesn't cut it. Living in DC especially, the living wage here, guessing now is probably like $13.68, and that's
a made-up definition, right?
So how do we
define
move up?
living?
Yeah, especially for returning citizens, how do you move them up? And that's one of the things we try to show, and we try to get that ownership mentality through Change Your Perceptions, through the Aspire program, through Clean Decisions. Is basically move up. Don't give up. Don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I just want to acknowledge something, and that is that y'all aren't unicorns. I mean, it's not like you're the only 2 people who have the tenacity to fight, to keep applying, to keep persevering, to get the multiple jobs. Several years ago, after we had started launching our research program on reentry from prison and jail, I don't know how this fellow found me, but I got a random phone call. He was an employer in the greater DC area, and he wanted to know, how can I find people who have served time? Because I want to employ them. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Why do you ask? Oh, well, I've had some in the past, and they are the best employees. It's getting back to this. We don't have good data on this, but it's getting back to this metric that if we could celebrate and advertise more that there's a real opportunity for employers here. I think that could be very rewarding, and it acknowledges that most folks are really intent on trying to not just find a job, but advance and be independent and give back. So we have 5 more minutes. I'd like to do the same thing we did at the last panel, which is to close out this round by just going one by one in whatever order you're comfortable with, and just sharing if you could make one recommendation for change in support of helping people obtain and keep employment and advance professionally, what would it be?
I mean, well, with that said, Clean Decisions does clean kitchens, it does events, it does provide services in the landscaping field. we do hire returning citizen. If you, the next party or event you go to, and you see that, you know, we can be there, we probably can work there. The next kitchen you go to, think about us. You know, we try to promote that within the company, and we try to keep that, you know, that keep going, hiring returning citizens. So Clean Citizens is there, and I think the action to take today is the next restaurant you eat at or the next event you're in, you know, make sure you talk about us. You know, I'm thankful for that.
Thank you. We'll keep that in mind. Clean decisions.
Well, I would say care. You can start with the pledge that CCE has to support, if you are a business, those who are returning, and support those businesses that are supporting folks who are returning. But to care enough to find out about the issues, care enough to find out what you can do to help. You know, many times we say, oh, they're just not doing enough, and meanwhile, there's something that we can do that we're not doing. So care enough to take some action.
Cynthia, you mentioned your CCE pledge. I think that's really important, and we will certainly be a part of that. But I think other large corporations need to be involved in this work. And we, as I mentioned earlier, we're a part of the White House Fair Chance Business Pledge. It was 18 companies to start. It ended up being 300 and something companies by the end of it. Obviously, some of that momentum stalled with what happened in the election last year. But I think it's important to remember that the real work around this stuff from a policy perspective still happens at the state and local level. And so there's still real opportunities to continue to move the ball forward. And as that happens, continue to engage companies that have presences in those states about how they can actually give work opportunities to these folks who are returning citizens. I think it's great to be supportive of organizations, to sort of talk the talk, but getting more companies to actually walk the walk, particularly in states where some of the policy victories are happening, is really crucial.
I think knowing the need of the returning citizen, meet them where they are, and mean it. Don't be a sayer, be a doer. Meet them. If somebody call you and say, hey, can you help me find a job, don't just pass the buck and give them a phone number. Literally go over the paperwork with them, help them. Show them that you're serious. You're not just passing them to the next person so they can pass them to the next person.
Right. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all sharing your thoughts and experiences, and thanks to the audience as well. Let's give this panel a round of applause. Thanks to all of you for joining live at Urban.
So great to hear from you.